In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, where civilizations had risen and fallen for over 10,000 years, a single universal truth had been established among all sentient species: humanity was disposable. The Council of Harmonious Beings, an intergalactic alliance that spanned across 3 major star systems, had made this determination 200 years ago when Earth's first contact delegation arrived at the negotiation tables. What they found was primitive, crude, and utterly forgettable. Humans possessed no special abilities, no advanced technology that hadn't already been surpassed centuries before, and no natural gifts that made them stand out in a galaxy teeming with shapeshifters, telepaths, and beings made entirely of crystalline energy. Yet what nobody predicted was that humanity's greatest weapon had nothing to do with their hands, their minds, or their bodies. It had everything to do with something far more dangerous: the human voice. Backed by the human will to survive against all odds, the detention block of the Meridian Station orbited silently above the industrial planet of Krell. 7, a world known throughout the galaxy as a processing center for captured soldiers and political prisoners. The station itself was a marvel of advanced engineering, with corridors that shifted and reconfigured themselves based on security protocols, detention pods that existed partially in subspace to prevent escape, and guards whose sensory capabilities exceeded anything biological evolution could produce naturally. It was considered the most secure facility in the entire eastern quadrant of the galaxy. Today, that confidence was about to be tested in ways nobody could have anticipated. Captain Vexthar stood before the reinforced observation window of the command center, his 4 compound eyes fixed on the detention block below. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light from the nearby star Krell, casting colorful refractions across the metallic walls of the chamber. As commander of the Meridian Station, Vexthar had overseen the imprisonment of some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, rebel leaders, and military operatives. But this assignment was different. This was personal, and in a way that made him uncomfortable, which was unusual for a being of his rank and experience. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that could be heard simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers. One of his subordinates, a Thrillian named Kestix, whose chitinous body was barely visible beneath layers of biometric armor, stepped forward with a holographic display. The Thrillians were among the most efficient soldiers in the known universe, their multi-jointed limbs capable of executing combat maneuvers at speeds that would appear as blurs to lesser species. The human prisoner remains in containment cell D7. Nutrition intake is minimal, but the creature shows no signs of deterioration. Psychological evaluations indicate standard fear response, nothing that suggests risk of escape or self-termination. Vaxthar made a sound that resonated through the command center, something between a growl and a harmonic chord. The human. How he despised having to spend any amount of mental energy on the primitive species. And the rest of the squad? All elite operatives accounted for and in peak condition, reported another officer. This one, a Nix-class android whose consciousness was distributed across multiple processing nodes throughout the station. The 6 team members selected for your strike operation are undergoing final preparations in Training Bay 1. They have been briefed on the target location and mission parameters. Confidence levels are exceeding acceptable thresholds. The strike team that Vexthar had assembled represented the finest warriors the galaxy had to offer. Each had been hand-selected for their specific abilities and combat records. There was Thrag, a Kelvian warrior whose physical strength could collapse a reinforced building with a single punch. Beside him stood Silas, a Viridian whose mastery of quantum manipulation allowed her to exist in multiple states simultaneously, making her nearly impossible to target or strike. The third member was Zorn, a Myconid intelligence operative whose spore-based communication system could infiltrate enemy networks and disable electronic systems from within. Then came Kael, a Zavian with the ability to manipulate gravitational fields in localized areas, and Mira, a former Ashanti empress whose telepathic abilities were so refined that she could control the thoughts of entire populations if given enough time. The final member was Corvus, a Shadowborn whose ability to move unseen through darkness had made him legendary among military circles. These 6 were the most decorated soldiers in the entire Galactic Alliance. Together, they had crushed resistance movements, toppled governments, and eliminated threats that would have caused lesser species to surrender immediately. They had never failed a mission. They had never lost a member. They had never even come close to being defeated. They represented everything that made the advanced species superior to the scattered, primitive civilizations that still clung to their backward ways throughout the galaxy. And yet, Vextar found himself experiencing something that would have been called anxiety, if he were capable of admitting it. The human in Cell D7 had been captured 3 months ago during a routine patrol near the outer colonies. It should have been a simple apprehension. Instead, the human had managed to eliminate 17 soldiers before being subdued. 17. Not through weapons technology or supernatural abilities, but through something far more troubling: cunning, improvisation, and an almost inexplicable ability to adapt to situations in real time. Every soldier that Vextar had lost in that incident came from species that had been serving in the galactic military for thousands of years. Humans had only been part of the Alliance for 200 years, yet this one had managed to inflict damage comparable to a seasoned veteran. The briefing was scheduled to begin in 1 hour. The strike team would assault a hidden rebel outpost on the jungle moon of Verdant Prime. Intelligence reports suggested that an entire cell of human resistance fighters had established themselves there, plotting against the Council's authority. This was considered an insult. Humans plotting? Humans organizing? Humans believing they could stand against the might of the Galactic Alliance? It was almost laughable. Almost. The training bay was a cavernous space filled with holographic simulation pods and environments designed to test warriors under every conceivable combat scenario. When Vextar arrived, the strike team was already assembled, their bodies gleaming with military precision under the harsh artificial lights. Thrag's massive frame seemed to take up half the room despite the vast space, his thick hide the color of molten metal. Silas appeared to shimmer and fade like a ghost, her form only half present in this dimensional layer. Zorn's mycelial network spread across his body like a living map of constellations. Kale's form seemed to bend the light around him, a visible distortion in the fabric of space-time. Mira's eyes glowed with an inner light that spoke of vast mental power barely contained, and Corvus seemed to be made of shadow itself, a void in the shape of a person. "The briefing commences," Vextar announced. A holographic display erupted into existence, showing the jungle moon and the target location. "Your mission is straightforward. The human resistance cell on Verdant Prime has become a problem that requires elimination. Conventional forces have proven insufficient, which is why I have selected all of you. Your task is to assault the compound, eliminate all resistance, and retrieve one prisoner alive for interrogation. You will have access to superior technology, tactical support from orbital bombardment, and the full authority of the galactic military behind you." Mira, the Ashanti Empress whose telepathic power allowed her to speak directly into the minds of everyone present, communicated her question silently. "Will resistance be significant?" "Humans," Vextar responded, making the species name sound almost like an insult. "They are primitives with basic weapons and limited tactical knowledge. They compensate for their inferiority through numbers and unpredictability. You should encounter perhaps 50 to 100 combatants, all of whom will be poorly equipped and untrained in comparison to your collective experience. This is a training exercise disguised as a military operation. You will find it trivial." Corvus, whose natural habitat was darkness itself, made an observation that only partially emerged from the shadows of his throat. "If they are so insignificant, why are we being sent? Why not simply drop kinetic weapons on their position and eliminate the entire problem?" Vextar had asked himself the same thing multiple times over the past week. The Council desires intelligence. They wish to understand what has motivated the humans to believe they could survive in an alliance of superior species. There is also the matter of the captured operative. The human currently held in our detention block apparently knows the leadership structure of this resistance movement. The Council hopes that through elimination of the resistance, the prisoner will reveal himself to be of little tactical value, proving once and for all that humans are disposable and not worth the resources we spend managing them. The strike team processed this information in their respective ways. Thrag flexed his massive claws. Silas fragmented slightly, her form existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Zorn's spawn network pulsed with anticipation. Kale's gravitational field fluctuated, creating small depressions in the floor around him. Mira closed her eyes and the psychic pressure in the room increased noticeably. Corvus remained still, a void that seemed to absorb even the artificial light around him. "We move in 6 hours, Vextar concluded. "Prepare your equipment and your minds. This mission will be over by tomorrow morning. By this time next week, the humans will be nothing but a historical footnote." recorded in the archives of failure and forgotten within a generation. As the strike team dispersed to their preparation chambers, Vexthar found himself walking toward the detention block. His four eyes couldn't seem to stop thinking about the human in cell D7. What made this creature so different? What had allowed it to survive where thousands of other humans had failed? What gave it the ability to kill seasoned soldiers with nothing but improvisation and cunning? He stood outside the cell, looking at the human through reinforced transparent polymers. The creature was smaller than he had expected, barely 2 meters tall, with only 2 eyes and a face dominated by a mouth that seemed far too large. Its skin was pale and vulnerable looking, lacking any natural armor or protection. It wore the simple grey coveralls of a detention prisoner, and there was a visible wound on its left arm that had been treated by the medical systems but left visible as a reminder of captivity. The human looked directly at him. That was unexpected. The monitoring systems indicated that the creature should have been attempting rest during the night cycle. Instead, it was alert, aware, waiting. Its 2 eyes, so simple and primitive compared to Vexthar's compound vision, seemed to be studying him with an intensity that bordered on predatory. Without thinking about why he was doing it, Vexthar activated the communication system. "You will be executed tomorrow," he stated simply. "A strike team will eliminate your resistance cell, and then you will be processed for termination. Your species will be remembered as a minor inconvenience in the history of the galaxy." The human stood up from the bunk. It moved with surprising grace for a being with such an inefficient bipedal structure. When it spoke, its voice came through the communication system, and Vexthar experienced something unexpected. The sound of human speech was not what he anticipated. It was not the high-pitched squeak he had been conditioned to expect. It was deeper, resonant, carrying undertones of strength and certainty. "You keep saying that," the human responded. "That we're primitive, that we're inferior, that we don't belong here." The creature paused, and Vexthar found himself waiting for the next words as if they mattered somehow. "But you came here personally to threaten me before sending your elite team. You don't do that for things you believe are truly insignificant." The statement struck Vexthar with the force of a gravitational manipulation. The human was right, which meant he had allowed his own thoughts to betray him. He turned away from the cell and left the detention block without responding, but the human's words remained with him, echoing through his consciousness like an infection he couldn't remove. Behind him, in the cell, the human smiled. It wasn't a smile of fear or resignation. It was a smile of terrible certainty, as if the human knew something that Vexthar didn't, as if tomorrow was not going to unfold the way the commander had planned. In 6 hours, the strike team would launch their assault on Verdant Prime. They would find the resistance compound and prepare for what they believed would be a simple victory. They would encounter enemies that their tactical computers had already predicted and calculated. Everything would proceed according to military doctrine and established protocol. None of them had any idea that the real war was about to begin, or that it would be won not with weapons, not with powers, and not with superior technology. It would be won with something that no amount of evolutionary advancement could properly defend against. It would be won with words, with ideas, with the one thing that made humans dangerous beyond all measure. It would be won with truth. The insertion shuttle descended through Verdant Prime's atmosphere with the precision of a surgical instrument. The jungle moon below was a riot of green and blue, with vegetation so dense that scanning equipment barely penetrated more than a few hundred meters below the canopy. The strike team sat in a cargo hold, each member prepared in their own way for what they anticipated would be a straightforward elimination mission. The ship's artificial gravity maintained a comfortable hold on their bodies, as the atmospheric friction caused slight vibrations through the metal hull. Mira, the Ashanti Empress, opened her eyes and surveyed her teammates. She could feel their mental states through her telepathic sense. Drag was calm, almost bored, his consciousness a simple pattern of waiting energy, ready to be directed toward violence. Silas existed in a state of quantum readiness, her mind distributed across multiple probability states, ready to collapse into reality at the moment of combat. Zorn's mycelial network was already preparing spore clouds, his consciousness spread through the biological distributed network like a web of anticipation. Kale had his gravitational fields already subtly active, warping the space around his body in preparation for the moment he would need them. Corvus was the shadow at the edge of perception, his consciousness barely present even in this enclosed space, mostly existing in the darkness that lingered in the corners. All of them were ready. All of them were confident. All of them were about to discover what it meant to be challenged by something their tactical computers hadn't prepared them for. Landing zone approaching, the pilot announced. Estimated time to ground contact, 4 minutes. All squad members confirm readiness. Each member of the strike team acknowledged in their own way. Mira simply nodded, her telepathic power allowing her to confirm readiness to all simultaneously. The insertion point was 3 kilometers from the target compound, chosen specifically to allow the team to approach the resistance fighters without warning. Orbital surveillance had confirmed the presence of approximately 75 humans in the compound, armed with primitive projectile weapons, explosives, and a few stolen pieces of galactic military technology that had been stripped of their advanced functions. Against the strike team, these weapons would be less effective than a child's toy. The shuttle touched down with barely a tremor. The rear ramp descended, and the strike team emerged into the humid air of Verdant Prime's jungle. Immediately, the environment began attacking them in small ways. The moisture in the air was corrosive to certain alloys. Insects swarmed around Zorn's mycelia network, trying to integrate with his biology, and the uneven ground challenged even the advanced balance systems that Thrag and Kale had integrated into their bodies. But these were minor annoyances, the kind of environmental resistance that was expected when operating on primitive worlds, nothing that would impact the mission. Vexthar observed the team's deployment from the orbital command center above. His 4 eyes tracked each member as they moved through the jungle with perfect military formation. The route they had planned would take them directly to the compound's main entrance within 3 hours. From there, they would breach the outer perimeter, eliminate resistance, secure the compound, and prepare the prisoner extraction team for the capturing of the human cell leader, who the Council believed to be in command of this operation. "Orbital bombardment support is standing by," one of the officers reported. "Ready to provide kinetic strike support if the team encounters unexpected resistance." "Unnecessary," Vexthar responded. The confidence in his voice was complete. "The strike team will not require assistance. Mark my words, this operation will be completed with minimal effort and maximum efficiency. By this time tomorrow, the human resistance movement will cease to exist as a functional organization." He didn't know why he was narrating his confidence. Perhaps it was because he needed to hear it out loud to convince himself as much as his subordinates. But there was something about the human in the detention cell that created doubt, and Vexthar had learned to trust his instincts, honed by 10,000 years of evolutionary refinement. The jungle underwent a transformation as the strike team moved deeper into it. What had seemed like random vegetation began to reveal itself as something far more complex. The humans, it appeared, had spent considerable time reshaping the environment to serve their purposes. Trees had been positioned to create natural barriers. Undergrowth had been cultivated to create false trails that led away from the actual paths. Water sources had been diverted or contaminated with minerals that would interfere with electronic tracking. It was crude, but it was effective enough that the strike team's navigation systems became less reliable the further they progressed. Corvus, existing primarily in darkness, was the first to recognize the problem. His consciousness emerged from the shadows long enough to communicate directly to Mira, who relayed the information telepathically. "The environment has been deliberately modified. This is not a random jungle. This is a constructed defensive position." Thrag was unmoved by this revelation. Modified jungle still requires the same solution. We breach, we eliminate, we complete the mission. Environmental complexity doesn't change tactical outcomes. But Silas, whose quantum perception allowed her to see probability patterns that others could not, expressed concern. "The probability outcomes I'm detecting are not aligning with our expectations. There should be high variance in potential scenarios, but instead everything seems to be converging toward a narrower set of possibilities. This suggests either superior planning or—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Or what?" Kale demanded. "Or they know we're coming, and they prepared something we haven't accounted for." 3 hours into their advance, the strike team came to a halt at the edge of a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the compound, exactly as orbital surveillance had indicated. Concrete structures, basic defensive positions, watchtowers with crude spotlighting systems. It looked exactly like what they expected. A desperate human settlement trying to resist galactic authority with primitive means. The compound's main gates were visible, and the strike team could sense movement within. Approximately 42 human signatures had been detected near the gates, with approximately 30 more scattered throughout the internal structures. They were likely armed and arranged in a defensive formation that suggested they were expecting some form of military action, though their preparations were laughably inadequate when measured against the strike team's capabilities. Frag stepped forward, ready to simply charge through the gates and eliminate everything inside. Silas prepared to fragment herself across multiple probability states to overwhelm any possible defensive response. Zorn prepared to release a spore cloud that would disable electronic systems and confuse biological sensory organs. Kale prepared to create gravitational depressions that would collapse fortifications. Mira prepared to lock down the minds of anyone who might attempt to organize a coordinated defense. Corvus prepared to move through the shadows and eliminate sentries before they could raise alarms. It was a devastating array of capabilities, each perfectly designed to overcome different types of resistance. Together, they represented a force that had never been defeated. They represented the ultimate expression of galactic military superiority. And they were about to learn the most important lesson that any advanced civilization could learn about their own limitations. The gates exploded inward from Thrag's charge. The buildings shattered under Silas's quantum-distributed strikes. The electronic systems failed as Zorn's spores infiltrated every circuit board. The ground beneath them warped and shifted under Kale's gravitational manipulation. And yet none of this mattered. The humans inside the compound were not trying to defend themselves. They were not organizing any form of resistance. They were not even trying to fight back. Instead, they were running. And as the strike team realized what was happening, a sinking sensation began to form in their consciousness. They had missed something fundamental. They had misread the situation entirely. The compound was a trap, but not the kind they had expected. It was a decoy. A deliberate sacrifice designed to keep them occupied while something else happened. The revelation came directly into Mira's consciousness as her telepathic senses finally picked up what she had been missing. There were no resistance leaders in this compound. There were no important operatives, no tactical knowledge, no valuable prisoners. There was only a group of humans who had been sent to die in order to provide a distraction. The distraction for what she had no time to determine. Because at that moment, the jungle around the compound erupted into chaos. Hidden positions that had been carefully camouflaged using natural materials and psychological misdirection revealed themselves simultaneously. Humans emerged from the vegetation armed with weapons that, while primitive in appearance, were wielded with frightening competence. But worse than the weapons themselves was what accompanied them: a sound, a voice, a human voice that seemed to carry across the entire clearing with impossible clarity, speaking in a language that every member of the strike team could understand, despite the fact that human vocal cords should not have been capable of producing such volume or harmonic resonance. Now, the voice said simply, and the world became complicated in ways that the strike team's tactical computers had never been programmed to handle. The surprise of the ambush itself was manageable. What was not manageable was the coordinated nature of the attack that followed. The humans fired from multiple angles simultaneously, their shots calculated to strike at specific weak points in the strike team's defenses. It was as if someone with complete knowledge of each team member's vulnerabilities had designed the entire engagement specifically to exploit their weaknesses. Thrag found himself surrounded on all sides, unable to use his superior strength to full advantage because the humans kept their distance, attacking from darkness and shadow rather than engaging in direct combat. Silas's quantum fragmentation left her vulnerable to coordinated attacks because the humans seemed to know exactly which probability states she was most likely to inhabit. Zorn found that his spore clouds were being circulated and dispersed by wind patterns that seemed almost deliberately designed to reduce their effectiveness. Kale discovered that the gravitational distortions that should have crushed the human position were being countermeasured by the humans' clever use of ground features and positioning. Mira felt her telepathic probe sliding off barriers constructed from something that felt like ordered chaos, impossible to grasp with her mental touch. Corvus found that the shadows he relied on for movement and concealment were being flooded with light from sources that had been positioned throughout the jungle with mathematical precision. For the first time in their careers, the strike team was not winning. They were not dominating. They were not in control. The voice spoke again, and this time it seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the jungle itself had learned to speak. You have superior technology. You have superior abilities. You have superior numbers and superior training. But you lack something that humans have perfected over the course of our entire history. The human offensive pressed harder, more coordinated, more efficient. The strike team began to realize that they were not being attacked randomly. Every assault was designed to divide their attention, to prevent them from coordinating with each other, to isolate them and force them to face challenges individually rather than as a unified force. It was the strategy of someone who understood that they could not defeat this team through superior force, so they would instead defeat them through superior understanding of how to neutralize force. "We understand you," the voice continued as the battle raged around them. "We understand how you think because we were forced to learn. We understand your tactics because you've used the same tactics against every inferior species for the past 10,000 years. We understand your psychology because you made the mistake of underestimating us. And we understand something else that you've forgotten in all your years of dominance." Corvus managed to move through the shadows and locate the source of the voice. It came from a human standing on a ridge overlooking the compound, partially concealed by the canopy but entirely visible to his shadow sight. The human appeared to be their prisoner from the detention cell, but that was impossible. The prisoner was in detention orbit. It couldn't be here. It shouldn't be here. And yet it was, standing with perfect posture, its primitive eyes somehow managing to observe the entire battle despite the biological limitations of human vision. Its mouth moved, and the terrible voice continued. "We understand that in a galaxy full of superiority, the one thing you're not superior at is survival. You never had to learn how. You never had to adapt. You never had to do the one thing that humans do better than any species that has ever existed." A strike team leader, Thrag, tried to push toward the voice, toward the human figure standing above the chaos. But the coordinated attacks of the resistance fighters kept him hemmed in, kept him from being able to concentrate his power for a single devastating blow. Beside him, the other members of the strike team faced similar problems, trapped in a battle that they were winning tactically but losing strategically. "We survive," the human voice finished. "Human survive. And we do it not with power or ability or natural gifts. We do it with something far more valuable. We do it with hope. We do it with adaptation. We do it with the refusal to accept that something is impossible just because the odds suggest it should be." The resistance fighters pulled back suddenly, abandoning the direct assault. It seemed like a tactical retreat, a moment where the strike team could recover and reorganize. But they all understood now what had happened. The humans had never expected to win this battle through direct combat. They had never expected to defeat the strike team through superior firepower. This entire engagement had served a different purpose. It had served to deliver a message, to demonstrate something that no tactical briefing could have prepared them for. The humans were not afraid. The humans were not fighting for survival out of desperation. The humans were fighting because they believed they could win, and belief, they were discovering, was a weapon that no amount of technology could entirely neutralize. Thrag looked at the human figure standing on the ridge, still perfectly visible, still perfectly exposed, but somehow completely untouchable. "What is your name?" the massive Kelvian warrior asked. The human seemed to smile, and when it spoke again, the voice was different. It was just a normal human voice now, stripped of the impossible resonance and clarity it had possessed moments before. It was small and vulnerable and fragile, the voice of a being that by every measurement should have been insignificant, and yet it carried absolute certainty. "My name is Marcus," the human said, "and I'm here to show you that the galaxy is about to change." The strike team regrouped in the clearing as the sun set on Verdant Prime. They had achieved their objective. The compound had been destroyed. The resistance cell had been scattered. But they had also experienced something that no tactical report would be able to explain. They had experienced the possibility of their own defeat, and that possibility, once acknowledged, could never be fully erased. The strike team's return to Meridian Station was conducted in complete silence. No member of the elite squad spoke to the others during the shuttle ascent, during the docking procedure, or during the decontamination process that followed. Their mission, while technically successful in that the resistance compound had been destroyed, felt hollow in a way that their tactical briefings had never prepared them for. They had won the battle. They had achieved all their objectives. And yet they had lost something far more important, the certainty that they were superior. Vexthar watched the debriefing reports flow across his sensory interface, his 4 eyes processing multiple data streams simultaneously. The compound had been eliminated. Approximately 47 human combatants had been eliminated or dispersed. Resistance infrastructure had been destroyed. Tactical objectives had been achieved. By every measurement that the Galactic military used to determine success, the operation had been perfect. and yet his own intuition, honed by thousands of years of evolutionary refinement, screamed that something had gone terribly wrong. When Thrag entered the commander's office still bearing the scars from the engagement on Verdant Prime, Vexthar could feel the change in the massive Kelvian warrior, the absolute confidence that had characterized Thrag before the mission was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, the beginning of doubt. "Report," Vexthar commanded, though he could already sense the content of what Thrag would say by reading the subtle variations in the warrior's body language. The humans were waiting, Thrag said without preamble. Not in the way a defensive position would prepare for expected attack. They were waiting for us. Specifically, they knew our capabilities, our tactics, our weaknesses. They didn't fight to win. They fought to teach us something. Teach us? Vexthar's crystalline exoskeleton vibrated with something that might have been indignation or might have been fear. What could primitive humans possibly teach a strike team of elite galactic warriors? Thrag was silent for a long moment before answering. That we are not as superior as we believe we are. That our advancement in technology and individual power does not translate into every form of superiority. That there is something in human nature that we have not accounted for in our calculations. The Kelvian warrior paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a tone that was almost alien to his normal patterns of speech. "I have killed thousands, Commander. I have destroyed civilizations and conquered star systems. But today, I felt something I have never felt before. I felt that the humans were not simply trying to survive. They were trying to save us." Vexthar's four eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme disturbance. "Save us? From what?" "From ourselves," Thrag replied. "From the certainty that our superiority is absolute. From the assumption that any problem can be solved through application of superior power." The human on Verdant Prime showed us something today. He showed us that there are forms of power we don't understand. Forms of power that exist outside our frameworks of technological advancement and biological enhancement. The commander dismissed Thrag without a response, but the warrior's words stayed with him, echoing through his consciousness like an infection that wouldn't clear. Vexthar found himself walking toward the detention block again, drawn to the cell that held the prisoner human. But when he arrived, he discovered something that made all of his eyes focus simultaneously on the same point in space. The cell was empty, not broken open, not damaged, simply empty. The prisoner was gone, and the security systems indicated that the human had never left the cell through any physical means. The monitoring equipment showed no breach, no escape attempt, nothing that suggested how the human could have vanished from a space that existed partially in subspace and should have been impossible to escape from. "Where is the prisoner?" Vexthar demanded, his voice causing harmonic vibrations that set alarms ringing throughout the detention block. The security officers scrambled to review the logs. After several tense minutes, one of them provided an answer that made no sense. "According to the surveillance records, the prisoner was released 6 hours ago, authorized by your own personal command code and biometric signature." Vexthar knew immediately that this was impossible. He hadn't released the prisoner. He hadn't used his command codes. Someone had spoofed his authorization. But how? Who on Meridian Station possessed the capability to forge command-level security protocols? The answer was deeply troubling, because it suggested that someone had access to the station's highest security systems, and that someone was almost certainly the human resistance movement. Kestix appeared moments later, his chitinous form moving with visible agitation. "Commander, we have a situation. The human prisoner is currently requesting an audience with the Council of Harmonious Beings via direct communication link. He claims to have information that they will find valuable. The Council is interested in hearing what he has to say." The phrase struck Vexthar like a physical blow. An audience with the Council, not as a prisoner, not as a subject to be interrogated and executed. An audience as if the human were a representative of some importance, as if he possessed something worth listening to. This was insane. This was a violation of every protocol, every hierarchy, every assumption upon which galactic civilization was built. "Deny the request," Vexthar commanded. "I'm afraid that's not possible," a new voice said, and Vexthar spun to see a holographic projection materializing in his office. The speaker was Prime Councillor Vosrath, the oldest member of the Council, and the being responsible for all military operations across the Eastern Quadrant. The Councillor's form was itself a marvel of evolutionary advancement, a being composed entirely of pure energy held together by a sophisticated quantum field. The Council has already accepted the humans' request. Communication is being established even as we speak. It seems your prisoner has something quite important to tell us. Vexthar wanted to object, wanted to assert his authority and prevent this insanity. But the presence of the Prime Counselor through holographic communication meant that his objections would be irrelevant. The Council had spoken, and even the commander of the most secure military installation in the Eastern Quadrant was not authorized to override the Council's decisions. The communication chamber of Meridian Station had been hastily prepared to receive the holographic feed from the human who called himself Marcus. The human's image appeared within the chamber, standing perfectly still, his primitive human form surrounded by technological marvels that represented 10,000 years of galactic advancement. For a moment, there was complete silence as the council members, the military leadership, and the command staff of Meridian Station observed the human. Then Marcus spoke. The human's voice was small, vulnerable, and completely ordinary. It carried no impossible resonance, no harmonic frequencies that could bypass mental barriers, no technological enhancement or psychic projection. It was simply a human voice, the voice of a being that had been designated as inferior by every measurement that the Galactic Alliance had ever developed. And as that voice began to speak, something remarkable began to happen. People started to listen. Not because they were forced to listen, not because the voice was compelling in any technological way, but because what Marcus said made sense in a way that challenged the very foundation of galactic civilization. "I'm not going to ask you to believe that humanity is superior," Marcus began. "I'm not going to claim that we should rule the galaxy or that we deserve equality with the oldest and most advanced civilizations. What I'm going to do is much simpler and much more dangerous. I'm going to explain to you why you're afraid of us." Silence fell upon the communication chamber. Afraid? The Council was not capable of fear. These were beings who had conquered empires, beings who had achieved technological mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe. They did not experience fear. But listening to Marcus continue, many of them began to wonder if that assessment was entirely accurate. "You're afraid of us," Marcus repeated, "because deep down you understand something that you've never been willing to admit. You're afraid that in a galaxy where advancement comes through specialization, through perfection of specific abilities and traits, humanity represents a different kind of advancement, an advancement through adaptability, through the refusal to accept limitations, through the capacity to survive in conditions where you believe survival should be impossible." Marcus walked forward, and the holographic cameras followed him. 10,000 years ago, I'm sure the first contact reports described humanity as primitive, crude, and utterly forgettable. And we were. We were operating with technology that you had surpassed 100,000 years before. But you made a mistake when you calculated our value. You only measured what we could do. You never measured what we could learn to do. You never accounted for the possibility that we could take your technology, integrate it into our own understanding, and use it in ways that your calculations had never predicted. Vexthar found himself thinking of the human in the cell, of the feeling he had experienced when speaking to the creature through the communication system. He found himself thinking of the battle on Verdant Prime, of how the humans had somehow known exactly how to neutralize the strike team's advantages. He found himself thinking of his own certainty, his own absolute belief in galactic superiority, and how fragile that certainty had proven to be when confronted by something that didn't fit the established parameters. "But the real reason you're afraid," Marcus continued, his voice carrying absolute certainty despite its physical smallness, "is much deeper than that. You're afraid of us because we believe in things. We believe in victory when the odds say victory is impossible. We believe in justice even when justice is convenient for no one. We believe in hope even when hope seems to be the height of irrationality. And you're afraid of us because your entire civilization is built on the assumption that belief in impossible things is a sign of primitive consciousness. Yet you cannot defeat a species that possesses that belief in abundance." The Prime Council of Vosrat's energy form pulsed with something that might have been irritation, or might have been fascination. "You suggest that humans should be given some form of privileged status because you possess hope?" Marcus nodded, which seemed like a gesture of absolute submission to galactic protocol. "I suggest that humanity should be given a choice. A real choice. Not the choice between serving the Galactic Alliance or being eliminated. Not the choice between assimilation and destruction. A real choice to determine our own future without the assumption that your way is the only way that leads to advancement. And if we refuse this choice, Another council member asked. A Zarvian whose gravitational manipulations allowed her to speak by creating pressure waves in the air itself. If we decide that humanity represents too much of an unknown threat to permit continued independence, Marcus smiled. And in that smile was something that made every member of the council understand exactly why they were afraid. The human was not afraid of death. The human was not afraid of elimination or suppression or any of the weapons that the Galactic Alliance could bring to bear. The human was smiling with the knowledge of something that transcended physical power. Then you'll prove that I'm right, Marcus said simply. You'll prove that advancement isn't measured in kindness or wisdom or the capacity for genuine understanding. You'll prove that all your technology and all your power will never give you something that humans possess naturally. You'll prove that you're not as advanced as you think you are. Is that really the statement you want to make to the rest of the galaxy? The council chamber erupted into a chaos of communication that no external observer could have properly processed. Council members were communicating with each other across multiple dimensional frequencies, expressing opinions and arguments in formats that the human mind would have found incomprehensible. But the core issue was perfectly clear to anyone with the capacity to observe it. Marcus had posed a challenge that could not be answered through violence or superior technology. He had posed a challenge that could only be answered through acknowledgement of a truth that the Galactic Alliance had spent 10,000 years avoiding. It took 3 hours for the Council to reach a consensus. 3 hours during which Marcus simply stood in the communication chamber, occasionally requesting water or food, behaving as if he had all the time in the galaxy and was utterly confident in the outcome. When the decision came, it was delivered by the Prime Counselor himself. Humanity will be granted provisional independent status, Vosrath announced. We will formalize a treaty that permits your species to develop according to your own standards and values, without mandatory integration into Galactic Alliance frameworks. In exchange, you will provide technological data and submit to periodic council observation to ensure that your development does not pose a threat to galactic stability. It wasn't victory. It wasn't the complete independence that Marcus had seemed to suggest humans deserved, but it was something far more important. It was acknowledgement. It was the admission that humans were something more than disposable. Marcus bowed with appropriate respect. The human resistance accepts these terms. As the communication ended and Marcus's holographic form faded away, Vaxstar found himself standing alone in the communication chamber, his 4 eyes processing data that his mind struggled to accept. The strike team had won the military engagement on Verdant Prime. But they had lost the war. They had lost it not to superior weapons or enhanced abilities. They had lost it to something far more dangerous. They had lost it to hope. They had lost it to belief. They had lost it to the refusal of one species to accept that something was impossible. The human had changed everything, with nothing but words, with nothing but certainty, with nothing but the belief that the galaxy could be different than it currently was. And in changing everything, Marcus had shown the entire Galactic Alliance something that no amount of training or technological advancement could have prepared them for. He had shown them that there were forms of power that existed beyond their understanding, forms of power that came from within rather than without, forms of power that grew stronger the more they were used rather than the more advanced they became. Humanity had survived in a galaxy of superior species not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced. They had survived because they refused to believe that survival was impossible. And in that refusal, they had become more powerful than any empire the galaxy had ever known. Weeks later, as Marcus returned to Earth aboard a diplomatic vessel escorted by council representatives, he made a final transmission to the detention cell where he had been held. Vexstar, still confused and disturbed by the implications of what had transpired, accepted the communication. "I want you to understand something," Marcus said, his small human face filling the commander's sensory interface. "I was never your prisoner. I was just waiting. Waiting for you to understand what your fears were telling you. Waiting for you to realize that the galaxy wasn't built on superiority at all. It was built on fear. Fear of the different path, fear of the unknown, fear of anything that didn't fit neatly into established parameters." Vexstar had no response that seemed adequate. "Humanity is going to change the galaxy," Marcus continued. "Not through conquest, not through weapons, but through something far more profound. We're going to change it by showing everyone that there's another way to be strong, another way to be advanced, another way to survive." The transmission ended, and Marcus was gone. But the words remained, echoing through Vexstar's consciousness like a prophecy. The human had spoken, and everything the Galactic Alliance believed about itself would never be quite the same again. In the years that followed, human scientists would work alongside the most advanced minds the galaxy had to offer, creating technologies that shouldn't have been possible. Human diplomats would establish relationships with species that had considered negotiation beneath them. Human fighters would earn respect through not just their tactical abilities, but through their refusal to surrender hope, even in the darkest circumstances. And slowly, species by species, civilization by civilization, the galaxy began to understand what Vexstar had learned in a detention block above an industrial planet. Understanding had not come through technology or power. It had come through listening to a human speak. It had come through words backed by certainty. It had come through hope. Humanity had entered the Galactic Alliance as a disposable species. By the end of the century, they would have transformed the very meaning of what it meant to be advanced. They would have shown a galaxy of superior beings that there was a form of superiority they had never even attempted to measure. And they would have done it not with weapons or warfare or technological dominance. They would have done it by speaking truth in the face of fear, by holding on to hope when logic suggested surrender, by refusing to accept that something was impossible simply because the odds, the technology, and the evolutionary advantage all suggested it should be. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, where a small blue planet orbited a yellow sun, humans were just beginning to understand their true place in the universe. Not as servants, not as inferiors, but as the keepers of something that no amount of advancement could ever fully replicate or understand. The keepers of hope itself.